thank you for tuning into Cognitive Resonance, where we find people in our lives that are just amazing creators. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing Jim Smiros, who we have to be 20 years, almost 20 years.
Oh, I think so, sure.
And Jim is a well-known architect, and his work, it speaks to itself. But I think what I was moved mostly by was this, people like to do classical design, but it's kind of like looking at a fine painting, and there's proportions that you seem to get right on. And I know years ago, when we first met, I asked you this question. I said, Jim, how do you get the proportions right? And you introduced me to this entire, next thing I was in Manhattan going, and I'm in a ballroom with 2 stories, private, and you open up for me a world of appreciating classical design. So I'd like to, if you could, I know you were born in the city, so you have this city exposure, but how did where does this all start? Maybe we can say, where does this understanding start? Is it something you were born with? Did you just find it along the way?
Well, honestly, I can remember back to kindergarten, and I was the kid in the corner building with blocks, and I was making airports. And
Airports.
Yeah, I just, it sticks in my mind. I was always busy with blocks. My mother was actually a watercolorist. She stayed at Cooper Union, and I spent countless hours in her studio. And she would be painting, and I'd be sketching, and I would always sketch houses. And I knew since I was a kid that I've always wanted to be an architect. And my heritage is Greek, and so, of course, I studied the classics and I studied the Greeks, and I think that so much of what we see today in classical architecture, it's got its roots in the Greek world, and it influenced me. And it's interesting. I studied it. I went to school at a time where really postmodernism was more in vogue and being more practiced, but it still had classical roots. So I learned about the classics. And when I graduated from school, I worked at Edward Durrell Stone, which was an international style firm. And Stone, had done the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, the GM Tower on Fifth Avenue, U.S. embassies, and, many, many large scale projects, but all really very modern. So we didn't do much classical work there. But as I decided to open my own firm, I found that I had decided to really focus on residential. And what I found was that more traditional style architecture, really rooted in classical design, was what people were really most interested in. And I think it's because there are icons contained within that that people relate to.
They stand the test of time.
They do.
When you see a modernist building or a brutalist building, my daughter lives in a brutalist building in London. And when you see that, you can almost timestamp it as to when that became in vogue. But the classical architecture, and I see your work, there's some of these beautiful pictures behind us. You look at something brand new that I know that you've done because I've worked with you on it. And the moment it's done, it looks like it has always been there. Or been there for, I don't know whether that's the actual point, but it's certainly what is achieved with the work I've seen you do.
And that is to some extent the point. The point is that these things should stand the test of time. What I find interesting is that, really during 2000, people were very, very focused on classical, true, traditional architecture, classically inspired architecture. But now we're doing more modern things, and they're classically rooted, though. And so they still have that same scale and proportion, and a lot of those same details are contained in
that word proportions. I don't think, and I'm not just because truly, I think your proportional scaling of things is just so spot on. I think that's because people can duplicate, make this look classical, and you look at it and it's, just the size of the molding, these proportions, which I think you have to have an understanding of that as an artist, or else it just, when you get around the corner, something doesn't fit, and then, you can fake a wall, but you can't fake an entire space. And that proportional understanding, is that something that came from school, or is it more intuitive?
Well, I think it is intuitive, but I also think it's fine-tuned by what we learn. And of course, the Greeks created what's called the golden section,
Yeah.
and those ratios. And, we use those today still in our work constantly.
Even in a modern space.
Oh, absolutely. It informs them, so much of what we do. And they become natural. It's just natural to use them, and second nature. And it makes a difference. It really does, that scale and proportion. And it's interesting to me because sometimes you talk about, you see this work that people say are McMansions. And so much of what's wrong, there's a lot that's wrong with those, but one of the key things is proportion, and they just lack scale, and they lack, relative proportion. So that is, a first step, getting that right.
Yeah, I think that you see a lot of those, and again, you see the timestamp. Well, when was that done? Why was it done?
Right.
And we get to be in our business in a lot of very expensive homes, not all done very well. And modern architecture can be beautiful, but you make one mistake and it's glaring. If there's one cabinet drawer that's not quite aligned or proportioned properly, it really looks. Certainly you've created this body of work over 30 years with your firm, and probably before then. But where do you see this? From as a creator, where do you see what's different? What do you know? I'm assuming, and I don't need to be, is that as your work unfolds, you see new things. Is there anything that you can, what do we look for in the next, in your next? Obviously, you're not retiring. You're on the top of your game, and the work is just more spectacular than ever. Where do you see yourself going next? Is it still with residential? And
it's an ongoing evolution, and really the focus of our work is residential. We just finished a great restaurant. It's a series of restaurants, actually, and I'm excited about that. And we got to do really, there's 4 different spaces contained within the restaurant.
Wow.
And it was really fun because we sort of ran, I don't want to say the history of architecture, but they're 4 very different spaces.
And you're doing you've always done the interiors and exterior.
There's an interior designer on that particular project, a restaurant interior designer that we partnered with, but it was a very close relationship. Sure. So, we picked some of the items she was great, and we partnered with her on it. And, whenever we always have a strong presence. So that comes through. I don't know in terms of what's next. It's always something that's well thought out and well designed. I will tell you a sort of a pet project of mine right now is we're doing an animal shelter in Huntington, in the town of Huntington. A friend of mine approached me. She was on the board of the little shelter, and it was getting to its 100th anniversary, and the place was really founded in the 20s, and series of old buildings, and it needed renovation. And she said, we need to renovate this. What do you think? And I said, I think we should tear them all down and build one new building. Yeah. And we had a big vision that I was able to bring to it because of the work I do in my residential architecture. And we actually redesigned the whole thing and got a variance from the town of Huntington to build this single new shelter on this property.
That's great.
So now we're undertaking fundraising to get the building going. But it's fun to take what you've learned and apply it, to different areas. So I'm always excited to see what the next special project is. I enjoy working in remote locations, we've been fortunate.
Stuff,
it adds another level of challenge that I like. It keeps us on our edge. So, we worked in Russia, we've worked in England, and, we do quite a bit of work in South Florida as well. And so, it's exciting as a creator. Every new project is exciting. If someone says to me, what's your favorite project? Honestly, the answer is what I'm working on right now. Yeah. I get up in the morning and I'm so excited to, head to the studio and get to work. And
you have a very creative space. I think this is, really your space, that old post office, which is a beautiful building. But to be able, when you walk in there, it's really just, I think it's important that an artist has a studio, it feels like a studio, not like an office building, if you will. So it's I'm sure that the space brings a continuity of energy to everybody that works there.
It does. We were very fortunate to find it, and we've been in there for 27 years, and it's great because there's a synergy there, and there's an energy, and being able to have the open studio environment that we have just makes our work that much better. So all these things you see here are it's really the result of all those hands.
Yeah, yeah.
Over 30 years, it's really there's 100 people that have touched this work, which is honestly very exciting for me.
The few times I've been up there, you walk in, and it's there's a silence about it because people are really entrenched in their thought process. So
yeah.
I know that you have built a really wonderful staff, and I know you have some young energetic minds that you're bringing along in the creative process. For the few people, some people that are here are much younger. We have some people that we've had on the show there that are artists, music artists and such. Somebody who's a creator today, or somebody who's coming along, what would you give them any advice to? Is what they might look for. Seeing it, you've got this great leadership. You've built a body of work. You're internet famous now with all the followers. So, what would you recommend to somebody who's looking to follow in your footsteps as a creator?
Well, I'll tell you something I learned a long time ago that I would pass on is that I had a client come in and he had some fantastic ideas. I mean, they were just out there. And first I was saying, no, we can't do that. I was just concerned about how that would look and how that would stand the test of time. And I after one or two meetings of a lot of no's, I said to myself, I've got to find a different way to manage this. And I've got to figure out how to harness his energy. He was a creator. And, I took a different approach and I was able to harness that and really make those things work beautifully. My work as a creator is a little different in that it's a partnership. So I'm not creating independently. I'm working with an end user, and I have to really lend them my talents to help facilitate what it is that they want to accomplish. Yeah. Right. And it's also, I'm partnering with them, with their budget, with, their site, and all these other parts and pieces that we've got to
code and the building department.
Absolutely. And, we've got to bring together. Yeah. And that's exciting. But I think the thing I would say is have an open mind, and don't be afraid to explore, and don't be afraid to test boundaries and to try new things, because it just makes the work that much better. And I think as architects, and certainly I think as creators, there's really, there's this saying, there's no such thing as a problem, only opportunities. And I think that's really a healthy way to look at it.
Yeah. I took a lighting design course in Chicago a couple of years ago, and packed house, young lighting designer. And they asked a question, what do you think is the biggest problem? And the first person was almost like budget. And she went through and she really just changed my thought process about budget. And she said, budget doesn't matter. If you're a good designer, budget doesn't matter. And she proceeded to show drawings and photos of a bakery she did in the city using used light fixtures. Mm-hmm. And it was brilliant.
That's great.
So the idea that I think you're right, that's an exact example of somebody who had an open mind. And it changed the way I design. I no longer say, well, budget's not the first thing. What's the objective? And then let's look at that. So I appreciate your time. I know that you're busy with all these wonderful projects, and I'd really just been great to have you here, and also to work on some really nice projects. We've done some projects in the city, some projects on the water that are just still clients we're still servicing. So it's a good thing. Thank you for tuning in to COGREZ with Jim Smiros from Smiros Smiros. And if you're Smiros Smiros, I should get that right. If you're looking for a truly creative architect for a special project, and in this case, not just residential, because I think you should look at Jim's work. I think you should take a serious look at those wonderful photography. You do a great job of documenting your work. And I think it's worth taking that exploratory view and having a meeting, going to your space and really understanding what that core. What I think it all comes from that. I think of an iconic or Doric column, mm-hmm. and how it's just harmonious with nature, and I think that's what comes out. So thank you very much for tuning in, Jim. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it. Thanks.